Wade Langston had been waiting 3 months for a woman who would never come. He stood on his porch, a letter in his hand promising a school teacher named Margaret, a woman with quiet manners and a gentle heart. But the woman who stepped off that dusty trail wasn't gentle. She had a gun on her hip and a storm in her eyes, a storm that could wash away everything Wade thought he knew. She said her name was Margaret. She knew the details from the letters, the little secrets they'd shared. She even wore the locket he'd sent, a small silver heart meant to be a promise. But when she smiled, it wasn't a promise, it was a warning. His gut screamed that this woman had seen death up close, that she had likely caused it. And that wasn't even the strangest part. The strangest part was what she knew about him. Things he'd never written in any letter. She knew about the scar on his left shoulder from a branding iron accident when he was a boy. She knew he took his coffee black with 2 spoonfuls of sugar, a habit he'd had since he was 16. She knew things a stranger couldn't possibly know. It felt like she'd been watching him his whole life, and when her sharp green eyes met his, something electric shot through him. This wasn't the comfortable quiet he'd hoped for with Margaret. This was raw and dangerous, like standing on a cliff's edge with a hurricane at your back. He felt his pulse hammer in his throat. His hands started to shake. This woman was a lie wrapped in a mystery. But as the sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Wade noticed something else, a dark stain on her worn leather boot. It was still wet. It was blood. And just as that realization hit him, he saw them. 3 riders cresting the hill, moving with a grim purpose that made the hair on his arms stand up. They weren't friendly visitors. They were hunters. And whatever this woman was running from, she had led it right to his front door. The question wasn't if she was dangerous. He already knew the answer to that. The question was whether her danger would be the thing that destroyed him or the one thing that could save them both. His eyes were locked on the blood. It was a dark, ugly smear against the faded leather, a testament to something recent and violent. His hand twitched, wanting to reach for the rifle propped against the porch rail, but he held still. If she'd wanted him dead, that gun on her hip would have already done its work. She followed his gaze down to her boot, her expression more one of annoyance than fear. She casually scraped the blood off on the edge of the wooden step, like it was nothing more than mud from a long walk. That simple, careless gesture told Wade more than words ever could. This woman was no stranger to violence. She was intimate with it. The 3 riders were closer now, the setting sun glinting off the steel in their hands. Wade could feel the air grow thick with tension. The woman, this fake Margaret, saw them too, and her entire body went rigid. Her hand drifted down, hovering just over the butt of her pistol. For the first time since she'd arrived, Wade saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It might have been fear. "Friends of yours?" Wade asked, his voice low and steady. He'd learned a long time ago that you never show fear to a predator. It only makes them hungrier. She turned those piercing green eyes on him, and he could see the gears turning in her mind. She was calculating, weighing how much of the truth she could afford to tell him, how much he could handle. "Depends on how you define friends," she said, her voice tight. "They're persistent. I'll give them that." Wade's jaw clenched. This wasn't his fight. This wasn't his trouble. But her trouble was on his land, and out here, that made it his problem. His nearest neighbor was a day's ride away. The sheriff was a ghost story folks told their kids. Out here, you solve your own problems, or you end up in a shallow grave. "How much time do we have?" he asked. The word "we" slipped out before he could stop it, and it surprised him. But looking at her, standing there like a cornered wolf, ready to fight against impossible odds, he felt a strange kinship. She was dangerous, yes, but she was also desperate. 10 minutes, maybe, she said, her fingers expertly checking the rounds in her revolver. "Less if they're as good as they think they are." In that moment, Wade made a choice that would change his life forever. He could have told her to get off his land. He could have turned his back and let her face her demons alone. Instead, he turned, walked back into his cabin, and came out with his own rifle and a heavy box of ammunition. "Then I guess we better get ready." The woman stared at him, a flash of genuine surprise in her eyes. "You don't even know what this is about. You don't know what they want." I know they're riding onto my land with guns drawn, Wade said, his hands steady as he loaded the rifle. That's enough for me. But even as he said it, a chilling thought crept into his mind. She moved around his property with an unnerving familiarity, as if she'd been here before. She knew the best places for cover, the clearest lines of sight. This wasn't a random arrival. This was a destination. This meeting was no accident at all. She moved with the confidence of a surveyor, not a lost traveler. She went straight for the water trough, positioning herself behind its thick wooden wall without a moment's hesitation. It was the best defensive position on the property, a spot that gave her cover and a perfect vantage point of the approaching riders. It had taken Wade 3 years of living on this land to figure that out. She knew it instantly. "You've been here before," he stated. It wasn't a question. He settled behind the sturdy corner of his cabin, his rifle resting on the window ledge. She didn't bother to deny it. "A woman alone learns to scout her trail. Your land looked quiet, defensible." Her fingers traced the rim of the trough, testing its thickness. It was a practiced, calculated move. She had planned this. The riders were close enough now that their faces were clear. Three hard men with the dead eyes of killers. The one in the lead had a nasty scar that sliced from his ear down to his jawline, a white line on his sun-darkened skin. When he smiled, it was a predator's grin, full of malice and the promise of pain. "Dixie Hargrove," the scarred man yelled, his voice echoing across the yard. "We know you're in there. Come on out, and we might just let the farmer live." Wade felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Dixie, not Margaret. The woman beside him tensed at the sound of her real name, but she didn't look surprised they'd found her. She looked like she'd been waiting for this moment for a very long time. "How many men have you killed, Dixie?" Wade asked, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes never leaving the trio of killers. "Not as many as them," she answered, and there was a raw honesty in her voice that he believed. "And never anyone who didn't have it coming?" The leader, Crenshaw, swung his leg over his horse, dismounting with a heavy thud. He held up a hand, and his men spread out, flanking the cabin. "Easy way or the hard way, Dixie," Crenshaw called out. "Makes no difference to us. You're coming back." Dixie's knuckles were white where she gripped her gun. "I told you in Kansas City, Crenshaw. I'm done." Crenshaw let out a laugh that sounded like rocks grinding together. "Nobody's ever done. You know that. You know too much." His cold eyes shifted, landing on Wade. "And now your new friend here. He's seen too much too." That's when it hit Wade with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just about her. They weren't here to take her back. They were here to silence witnesses, to erase anyone who knew they existed. The blood on her boots suddenly made a terrible, tragic kind of sense. "There's something you need to know," Dixie whispered, her voice so low it was almost lost in the wind. "The real Margaret. She isn't coming. She can't." Wade turned to look at her, a dawning horror on his face. "She's dead, Wade. These men, they killed her 3 days ago. They tortured her, trying to find out where I was." The world tilted under Wade's feet. The gentle school teacher, the woman whose letters had filled his lonely nights with hope, was gone, murdered, by the very men who now stood 100 feet from his home. "They used her letters to track me." Dixie's voice was filled with a grief so profound it was almost palpable. "I took her place. I thought, I thought I could lead them away, into a trap. I never meant for you to be a part of this." Rage, hot and pure, surged through Wade's veins. These men hadn't just brought violence to his land. They had taken his hope and twisted it into a weapon. They had used an innocent woman's death as bait. But then he looked at Dixie. He saw the unwavering steel in her spine, the fierce determination in her eyes. She was a liar, yes, but she was a liar who was willing to stand her ground and die fighting rather than let these monsters win. And in that moment, he knew where his loyalty lay. Crenshaw was raising his rifle, the final negotiations over. But just as he took aim, Dixie whispered something that made Wade's blood run cold. "Wade, there's something else. The real reason they'll kill us both to get to me." Her words hung in the air, thick and heavy like gun smoke. Wade wanted to ask, to demand what could possibly be worse. But Crenshaw and his men were advancing, their boots crunching on the dry dirt with methodical menace. "I saw something," Dixie said, her voice a frantic whisper. "In Kansas City. These men aren't just thugs, Wade. They're part of a massive operation." Her eyes were wide with the terrible weight of her secret. "They've been stealing thousands of head of cattle, then blaming it on the native tribes. They're trying to start a war." Wade felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. He'd heard whispers, dark rumors of such plots. Men in power getting rich off government contracts, supplying the army for a conflict they themselves had created. It was pure evil, and Dixie had seen it firsthand. "How many of them?" he asked, the scale of it beginning to dawn on him. This was why they'd killed Margaret without a second thought. Why they'd chased one woman across 2 territories. "Over 2,000 head," she breathed, "enough to make them rich and powerful men for the rest of their lives. And I can prove it. I have the ledgers, the names, everything." The revelation settled over Wade like a shroud. She wasn't just a woman on the run. She was a witness carrying a truth so explosive it could bring down territorial governments, expose corrupt military officials. No wonder they wanted her buried. "Last chance, Dixie," Crenshaw shouted, his patience gone. "Walk out now, or we burn this place to the ground with both of you inside." Wade didn't hesitate. He made a choice that defied all logic, all instinct for self-preservation. He stepped out from behind the cover of his cabin, into the open, his rifle leveled directly at Crenshaw's chest. "This is my land," Wade's voice boomed across the yard, steady and clear. "You're trespassing." Crenshaw's scarred face split into a wide, ugly grin. "Well, look at this. The farmer thinks he's a hero." He gestured to his men. "Looks like we're going to have to educate him, boys." "The only ones getting educated today are you," Wade shot back, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You're murderers, and you're not welcome here." "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into," Crenshaw sneered, taking a bold step forward. "This woman has more blood on her hands than you can imagine." Wade felt Dixie stiffen beside him, but his gaze didn't waver from Crenshaw. "Whatever she's done, it's in the past." "Is it?" Crenshaw's laugh was a venomous thing. "Ask her, farmer. Ask her about Denver. Ask her about the family she was supposed to protect, the one that burned because of her." For the first time, Wade heard Dixie's breath catch in a sharp, pained gasp. Whatever happened in Denver, that was the wound Crenshaw was digging his knife into. That was her weakness. "Some things can't be fixed," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Her gun never wavered. "But that doesn't mean you stop trying to do what's right." The standoff stretched, the air crackling with unspoken violence. 3 against 2. No cover. Nowhere to run. Sweat trickled down Wade's back. It all came down to who fired first. Crenshaw started to raise his rifle. This was it. But then, a new sound cut through the tension. Hoofbeats. Dozens of them, approaching fast from the east. Wade's heart plummeted. Reinforcements. They were finished. But then he saw it. A sight so unexpected it took his breath away. Dixie was smiling. A real, genuine smile of relief. "Right on time," she murmured. Before Wade could even ask who was coming, gunfire erupted from the tree line to the east. Crenshaw spun around, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. This wasn't part of his plan. "Dixie, who is that?" Wade demanded, his mind reeling. The riders burst from the cover of the trees, a storm of dust and fury. They weren't criminals. They were lawmen. Wade counted 5, then 6, all wearing the glinting silver star of federal marshals. And they weren't shooting at the cabin. They were firing on Crenshaw's men with deadly, practiced precision. "Federal marshals," Dixie said, her eyes still locked on a stunned Crenshaw. "I sent word about the operation before I ever came here. They've been tracking this scum for weeks." Crenshaw's face contorted in rage as the trap snapped shut around him. "You set us up," he roared. "I gave you every chance to walk away," Dixie called back, her voice ringing with cold fury. "But you wouldn't stop. You had to kill Margaret." The firefight was fast and brutal. Crenshaw's 2 men were caught in a crossfire, pinned between the cabin and the charging marshals. One screamed and fell from his horse, clutching a bloody shoulder. The other, seeing the impossible odds, threw down his gun and raised his hands high. But Crenshaw was pure hatred. He was a cornered animal, and he was going to take someone down with him. With a guttural yell, he lunged, not at the marshals, but toward the cabin. His pistol was up, aimed squarely at Wade's heart. Time seemed to slow down. Wade saw the flash, heard the roar, but before the bullet could find him, Dixie moved. She moved faster than he thought humanly possible, throwing her body in front of his. The bullet slammed into her side, spinning her around with a grunt of pain. She hit the ground hard, but even as she fell, she brought her own pistol up. One shot, clean and true. The bullet struck Crenshaw dead center in the chest. He staggered, dropped to his knees, and then pitched forward into the dirt, his reign of terror finally over. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the thunder of approaching hooves and Dixie's ragged breathing. Wade dropped his rifle and fell to his knees beside her, his hands pressing against the wound, trying desperately to stop the flow of blood that seeped between his fingers. "Why?" he choked out. "Why did you do that?" Her face was pale, her breath coming in shallow gasps, but her eyes were still sharp, still full of fire. "Because you stood with me," she whispered, "when you had every reason to run." The lead marshal, a weathered man with kind eyes named Samuel Brooks, dismounted and hurried over. He looked at Dixie with a mixture of concern and profound respect. "Miss Hargrove," he said, his voice full of admiration, "you took one hell of a risk." "Had to draw them out," she managed, wincing as Wade applied more pressure. "They were getting sloppy, endangering too many innocent people." Brooks nodded, then his eyes turned to Wade. "You must be Langston. Miss Hargrove told us you might be a man to count on." Wade's world shifted on its axis for the third time in an hour. "You planned this. You planned to bring them here." Dixie's hand found his, her grip surprisingly strong. "Not all of it. I came here to use your remote location as a trap, yes, but I thought I'd be facing them alone. I never planned on you. Being you." Her gaze was intense. "When I saw you stand up, saw you willing to die for a stranger, I knew I could trust you." "Trust me with what?" he demanded, the pieces of the puzzle still not fitting together. Brooks answered for her. "Miss Hargrove isn't just a witness, Mr. Langston. She's been working with us for 6 months. She went undercover inside their operation to gather the evidence we needed to bring them all down." Wade stared at the woman on the ground, the woman he thought was a killer on the run. She wasn't running from justice. She was delivering it. "The blood," he said, needing to know. "Whose was it?" "Margaret's," Dixie whispered, a tear finally escaping the corner of her eye. "I found her. It was too late to save her. But I wasn't going to let them leave her in an unmarked grave." He finally understood, but one question still burned. "Why here, Dixie? Of all the places in this territory, why my home?" Her eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw past the warrior, past the agent, to the woman underneath. He saw a raw vulnerability that stole his breath. "Because of what Margaret wrote about you," she said, her voice soft. "She wrote about a good, honest man trying to build something decent in a world gone mad. After everything I'd seen, I had to know if a man like that still existed." "And?" Wade asked, his heart in his throat. "He does," she whispered. A wave of relief washed over him, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. But the moment was shattered when Marshal Brooks knelt beside them, his face grim. "I'm afraid this isn't over," he said, his voice low. "We got Crenshaw and his men, but his operation was bigger than we thought. There were supposed to be 5 men in this tracking party. 2 of them are still out there, and now they know exactly where to find you both." Wade carried Dixie into the cabin, his movements gentle, belying the storm of emotion raging inside him. He laid her on his bed while Marshal Brooks sent riders out, fanning across the territory to hunt for the 2 missing killers. The bullet had passed clean through her side, a miracle that had missed anything vital, but it had left a wicked, bleeding wound. Wade's hands, usually so steady with tools and rifles, trembled as he cleaned the injury. She looked so small, so vulnerable lying there. "I'm not going to die from this," she said, her voice raspy but firm. She was watching his face, reading the fear in his eyes. I've had worse. That's not exactly a comfort, Wade replied, his voice tight as he tied off a clean bandage. How many times have you been shot? This makes 3, she said with a slight wince. The first time taught me to duck. The second taught me who to trust. This time, her eyes met his. This time taught me that some men are worth taking a bullet for. A heat bloomed in Wade's chest. Just a few days ago, his biggest worry was whether his crops would get enough rain. Now he was patching up a federal agent who had saved his life, a woman who had turned his entire world upside down and somehow set it right. Why didn't you just tell me who you were from the start? He asked, sinking into the chair beside the bed. He needed to understand. Dixie's gaze was heavy with the weight of her experiences. Because I've seen what happens to good men who get caught in other people's wars, she said softly. They end up dead. I thought I could handle Crenshaw on my own. Use your land, draw them in, and let the marshals take them. I never wanted you to even know I was here. But you didn't just use my land, he pressed. You came to me. Margaret's letters, she said, a faint smile touching her lips. She painted a picture of a man who built things with his own 2 hands. A man who was quiet and strong, who valued honesty above all else. She reached out, her fingers lacing with his. After swimming in a sea of liars and killers for so long, I had to see it for myself. I had to know if decency still had a place in this world. A current passed between them, something deeper than gratitude, more powerful than simple attraction. It was recognition. 2 lonely souls finding an anchor in a storm. And what did you find? He whispered. I found a man who stood up to armed killers for a woman he didn't know. Her thumb stroked the back of his hand. I found a man who didn't care about my past, only about the person I was trying to be. The quiet moment was broken by Marshall Brooks appearing at the door, his face etched with worry. We found their tracks, 2 riders heading for the eastern ridge. They're running hard for the territorial line. Wade was on his feet in an instant, his rifle back in his hands. How long before they're gone? Could be hours, could be minutes, Brooks said grimly. But men like this, they don't just run. They circle back. They get revenge. They won't stop until everyone who can identify them is in the ground. Brooks looked at Dixie, his expression full of concern. Miss Hargrove, you need to rest. You're no good to anyone like this. Like hell, Dixie snapped, trying to push herself up, a sharp gasp of pain escaping her lips. Those men are out there because of me. Margaret is dead because of me. I'm not hiding in here while other people clean up my mess. Wade gently pushed her back down onto the pillows, his hand firm on her shoulder. You're not hiding. You're healing, he said, his eyes locking with hers. So you can live to fight another day. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is let someone else carry the weight. You don't understand, she insisted, her voice urgent. Their names are Parker and Voss. They're not just thugs, they're trackers, the best I've ever seen. If they escape, they won't just come back. They'll bring an army with them. Brooks nodded, his face pale. She's right. This has to end now. Here. The weight of the moment pressed down on Wade. He could let the marshals handle it, hope they were good enough, or he could step up, take the fight to them, and protect the woman who had already sacrificed so much. Looking into Dixie's eyes, seeing the fiery spirit that refused to be broken, the choice wasn't a choice at all. Some things, some people, were worth any risk. Tell me what you need me to do, he said to Brooks. But before the marshal could answer, a sound ripped through the quiet cabin. The sharp crack of shattering glass. Someone had thrown a rock through the kitchen window. Attached to it was a piece of paper, and on that paper was a message that would change everything all over again. Marshal Brooks carefully picked up the note from among the shards of glass on the kitchen floor. He read it, and a dark cloud passed over his face. It's from them, he said, his voice flat. They want to make a trade. Wade snatched the paper from his hand. The handwriting was a crude scrawl, words scratched out with rage. The woman for our freedom, sunrise at Devil's Rock. Come alone. If we see anyone else, we start killing ranchers. 1 every hour until you comply. Devil's Rock. Wade breathed. He knew the place well. A treacherous maze of boulders and canyons 5 miles north. A perfect place for an ambush. They have no intention of making a trade. They'll kill whoever shows up and then disappear. Dixie was on her feet, swaying slightly, her face pale but her eyes blazing. "They're right about one thing," she said through gritted teeth. "This ends now. I'm going." "The hell you are," Wade said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You can barely stand. You'd be walking into your own execution." "So what's your plan?" Brooks demanded, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "We can't let them escape, but we can't ignore their threat. There are good families out there." Wade walked to the broken window, his eyes scanning the familiar hills and ridges of his own land. An idea began to form in his mind. A desperate, dangerous gamble. They chose Devil's Rock because it gives them the advantage. They think they know this country. He turned back to them. "But I know it better." "What are you thinking, Wade?" Dixie asked, seeing the look on his face. "There's another way into Devil's Rock," he said, his voice low and confident. "An old game trail. It follows the creek bed, hidden from above. It's rough, but it comes up right behind their position." Brooks's eyes lit up with understanding, while they're watching the main approach for a lone rider. "Exactly," Wade confirmed. "But for it to work, they have to believe Dixie is coming. They have to be watching for her." The implication hung heavy in the air. "You want to use me as bait," Dixie stated, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and tactical appreciation. "I want to end this without you or anyone else getting killed," Wade corrected gently. "It's too risky," Brooks argued. "If they spot you, Miss Hargrove will be a sitting duck." Wade looked at Dixie, truly looked at her. He saw the warrior who wanted to fight, but he also saw the strategist who knew a good plan when she heard one. "There's something else," Wade said, his voice dropping even lower. "Something I should have mentioned earlier." Both Dixie and Brooks stared at him, waiting. "Parker," Wade said. "I know him. He worked on a neighboring ranch a couple years back. Disappeared one night with a dozen of my neighbor's horses. I recognized him as soon as I got a good look at his face." "And you're just telling us this now?" Brooks asked, his tone incredulous. "I wasn't 100% sure until Crenshaw called him by name," Wade admitted. "But I'm sure now. I remember a scar on his left hand. Got it from a tangle with barbed wire." He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. "He's not just a tracker. He's a coward. He only fights when the odds are stacked in his favor." "What does that mean for us?" Dixie asked, moving closer to him despite the pain it caused her. "It means he won't be in the main ambush position. He'll be somewhere he can run," Wade explained, meeting her gaze. "Probably on the north side with the horses, watching your approach from a safe distance." "It's insane," Brooks muttered, but he was already nodding, seeing the logic in it. "Maybe," Wade agreed, "but it's the only chance we've got." Dixie put a hand on his arm, and a jolt of warmth shot through him. "Wade," she said, her voice soft but intense, "if we do this, what happens after? When the shooting stops and the marshals are gone?" He saw the real question in her eyes. It wasn't about the fight. It was about them. "I guess," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name, "we find out if this is real, or if we were just two people clinging to each other in a storm." Before she could answer, a new sound reached them. Hoofbeats, a lot of them, coming fast. It wasn't just two riders. It sounded like a small army. Brooks moved to the window, his hand on his gun, his face turning ashen. "Reinforcements," he said, his voice a grim whisper. "At least 8 riders, armed to the teeth." Wade's heart sank like a stone. Their desperate plan had just become an impossible one. The trap was closing, and they were caught right in the middle. The riders thundered into the yard, but they weren't the ragged killers Wade had been expecting. They were disciplined, moving in formation, and as the dust settled, Wade saw the unmistakable glint of silver badges on their chests. Federal badges. Marshal Brooks let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding and stepped onto the porch, raising a hand in greeting. "Reinforcements from the territorial office," he explained, a wave of relief washing over his face. "I sent a rider for backup when we first confirmed the scope of Crenshaw's operation." A tall, stern-looking man with salt and pepper hair dismounted and strode towards them. He was the lead marshal, a man named Thompson. "Brooks," he said with a curt nod. "Report." "We have two of Crenshaw's men, Parker and Voss, holed up at Devil's Rock," Brooks explained quickly. "They're threatening to kill local ranchers if we don't grant them safe passage." Thompson's jaw tightened. "There will be no negotiations." He turned his sharp eyes to Wade. "How many civilians are at risk?" "Three families within a 10-mile radius," Wade answered. "Good people. They don't deserve to be part of this." "You didn't bring this on them," Dixie said from the doorway. She was standing, leaning against the frame for support, but her voice was strong. "You protected a federal agent. There's a difference." Thompson looked at Dixie and his hard expression softened with respect. "Miss Hargrove, your intel has already allowed us to roll up half this operation. We've made arrests in 2 territories, including high-ranking officials. You've done more for this territory than you know." Wade helped her back inside, but she refused to lie down. "What's the plan for Parker and Voss?" she demanded. "Simple," Thompson said, his voice like iron. "We surround Devil's Rock. We give them one chance to surrender. If they refuse, we end it." "They won't surrender," Wade warned. "Parker's a coward, but Voss is a killer. Corner them, and they'll fight to the death." "Then it will be a quick death," Thompson replied coldly. He looked at Dixie. "Miss Hargrove, your part in this is done. You've risked enough. Rest. We'll handle it from here." Dixie shook her head, a stubborn fire in her eyes. "Those men killed an innocent woman to get to me. I'm seeing this through to the end." Wade saw that look and knew there was no arguing with it. "If she goes, I go," he said, checking the load in his rifle one last time. "This isn't your fight anymore, Wade," Dixie protested. "It became my fight the moment Crenshaw rode onto my land," he countered. "And it became my fight the moment you decided to trust me. Besides," he added, a grim smile touching his lips, "you'll need someone who knows the terrain." Thompson looked from one to the other, seeing the unbreakable bond that had formed between them. He gave a single decisive nod. "All right, but we do this my way. Overwhelming force. No heroics. They are 2 men. We are 12. The outcome is not in doubt." The ride to Devil's Rock was silent and tense. The marshals fanned out, creating an inescapable perimeter. Wade led a small group, including Dixie and Brooks, along the hidden game trail he knew, sneaking in from the south, while Thompson's main force closed in from the north. As they crested the last ridge, peering through a gap in the rocks, Wade saw that his instincts had been dead on. Parker and Voss were positioned in a natural fortress of stone, watching the main trail, completely oblivious to the flanking party now directly behind them. Thompson's voice boomed across the canyon, amplified by a speaking trumpet. "Parker, Voss, this is United States Marshal Thompson. You are surrounded. Throw down your weapons and come out with your hands up." The only answer was the crack of a rifle, the bullet sparking off a rock near Thompson's head. The battle was over before it truly began. Caught in a perfect crossfire, with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide, the 2 outlaws were hopelessly outmatched. Parker, the coward, went down in the first volley trying to scramble for his horse. Voss, the killer, put up a fiercer fight, but a well-aimed shot from Brooks took him in the leg. He collapsed, screaming curses, and threw his gun into the dirt. As the smoke cleared and the silence of the canyons returned, Wade looked at Dixie. The tension, the fear, the burning need for vengeance. It was all draining from her face, replaced by something he had never seen there before. Peace. The heavy burden she had carried for so long was finally being lifted from her shoulders. "It's over," she whispered, the words full of disbelief and relief. "This part is," Wade said, his hand finding hers. "Now we figure out what comes next." 3 weeks later, Wade stood on his porch, a mug of coffee warming his hands, and watched Dixie in the garden. She moved with a newfound grace, her hands tending the new shoots of corn and beans with a gentle touch. Her wound had healed into a thin, white scar on her side, a permanent reminder of the storm they had weathered together. The marshals were long gone, having taken Voss to face trial. Letters of commendation had arrived for both of them, official thank yous from a grateful government. The entire corrupt cattle operation had been shattered, its members arrested, its stolen assets returned. Justice had been done. But for Wade, the most important question remained unanswered. Every morning he woke with a knot of fear in his stomach, wondering if this would be the day she'd be gone. Her mission was over. The danger had passed. There was nothing keeping her here but her own choice. "You're thinking so loud I can hear it from here," she called out without turning around. She'd learned to read his silences, to understand the worries he never spoke aloud. He walked down the steps and stood beside her, the smell of fresh earth and blooming flowers filling the air. "Another letter came from Marshall Brooks," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, straightening up and wiping the dirt from her hands onto her trousers. "I read it. He's offering me a permanent commission, senior agent for the whole territory. Good pay, important work." Wade felt his stomach clench. It was everything a woman like her should want, a chance to keep fighting, to keep making a difference. "It's what you've been working for," he said, the words feeling like ash in his mouth. "It was," she said, turning to face him. Her green eyes were clear and serious. "3 months ago, that would have been my dream, a chance to keep putting away the bad men." She stepped closer, so close he could see the tiny flecks of gold in her irises. "But then I came here, and I found something I didn't even know I was looking for." "What's that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Home," she said. The single word hung between them, filled with a universe of meaning. "I spent my whole life fighting for other people, for their homes, their families. I forgot what it felt like to have something of my own, to build something, to watch something grow." She took his calloused hands in hers. "Margaret's letters were right about you, Wade Langston. You're a good man, building an honest life in a crooked world." A smile bloomed on her face, a radiant thing that made his heart ache. "I'm saying, I'd like to help you build it, if you'll have me." He didn't need any more words. He pulled her into his arms, his hands framing her face, and he kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of passion or desperation, but one of quiet certainty, of promises made and futures decided. It tasted like sunshine and hope. When they finally broke apart, she was beaming. "So," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "what do we do now?" "Now," she said, her eyes sparkling, "we write back to Marshall Brooks and politely tell him to find someone else. Then we finish planting this garden. And maybe, just maybe, we figure out what it feels like to just be happy." "And what if you get bored?" he teased. "What if you miss the adventure?" She laughed, a sound that was pure music. "Wade Langston," she said, leaning her head against his chest. "I have been shot at, chased, and left for dead. Trust me, waking up next to you every morning in a place that feels like home, that's all the adventure I'll ever need." 6 months later, they were married. Marshall Brooks stood as Wade's best man, and their neighbors, the very families they had protected, filled the small yard with laughter and well wishes. Dixie Langston kept her skills and her courage, but now she used them differently. Together, she and Wade established a network, a safe haven for women and families across the territory, fleeing from violence and danger. They built a life that was both wonderfully ordinary and quietly extraordinary. A life founded on the simple truth that sometimes your destiny doesn't arrive in the way you expect. Wade never got the quiet school teacher he sent for. He got something infinitely better. He got a warrior with a gentle heart, a partner who had seen the worst of the world and still chose to see the best in him. And Dixie, who had been searching for justice, found something she hadn't even known she'd lost. She found a place to finally, truly come home. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable Western tale where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.